Hello and welcome. And for today, for this sort of midweek episode, excuse me, wanted to talk about my favorite years in gaming. So these are years that I felt, for me personally, I didn't do too much of a deep dive as far as like historical relevance and things like that. This is just, I mean, I did try to take that into account, but a lot of it is just for me personally on some where I just felt like there was just a lot of great games. And also, to some extent, right, also just a lot of cool innovations or new consoles that were out and just everything all combined together, right, that made specific gears just really, really great in the overall timeline of when video games have been out. So for me, just a quick history. I've been playing video games since 1985, six or so is when I started playing video games, and I've gone back and played some games previous to that. But that's kind of my where I'm going to be more familiar with. So, for example, starting with the third generation and going up. So anything prior to that, I don't have a whole lot of experience with as I lived through the actual year. Because again, I would have been around five or six or so, give or take, right when I started getting into video games more, and where I have some memories of that and all that. But even before that, and not to criticize those previous years and all, but I feel like while they were definitely important as far as getting the video game industry going. There's also a lot there, right? That there just wasn't a whole lot, not just because the first and second generation were important for video games just because again it got the ball rolling on them, but when you look back and all, they don't quite hold up as well, I would say. But if you are from that generation though, I would definitely still love to hear some first person perspectives on those years there as they were happening, because I also don't have that nostalgia there for it, right, where I will, where a lot of these other years that I'm going to talk about. But with that out of the way, just see, I am just kind of driving around at the moment while I'm doing this. So if you hear a bit of an engine noise and all that, that's what that is there. And also the air conditioner, because it is a bit hot out there. So starting with number 10, I have the year 2018. So this is a fairly modern year. And what really stood out for me in this year was just mainly three games that put it on top for me here, to be on this list. And we're getting towards the end of the eighth generation, which was a bit slow to get going, but once it got going, though, it really came out with a lot of quality games, though. And 2018 was one of the better years, I feel, because when I look at just some of the stuff that came out during this year, I mean, there was definitely some great stuff there. And really, I mean, I can attribute this to really specifically three games, and that was Spider Man on the PlayStation 4, God of War also on the PlayStation 4, and then Red Dead Redemption 2. And just with those three games right there, I really feel that it made this year just incredible. And, and also kind of solidified the PlayStation 4's legacy in this generation. Because, honestly, the Xbox One, well, it there wasn't a whole lot to that system that I can say, right, that had a legacy behind it. But the PlayStation 4 definitely was firing on all cylinders. And so this is just some of the stuff that had come out, right, that were really good. But it wasn't just that, though. I mean, we had definitely had some other games. So, for example, we also had for indie titles Celeste, which is a great platformer and became really popular. We had Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, which was a Wii U game, but ported over to the Switch is where it really became popular. And for some people that are into the Sea of Thieves, that game came out as well too. And let's see, I'm just kind of going through a list here of some other stuff that had come out, some notable releases, but also like Monster Hunter World as well too, and Forza Horizon 4 and Detroit Become Human. So definitely a great year for as this generation started. It's starting to wind down a little bit, but was going out with a bang. And for me personally, I felt that this was a year that was definitely one of its more memorable for the eighth generation. Let's see. But then coming at number 9, I have 1986. And so I almost wanted to pick 1985, but because that was the year where we actually got the Nintendo over here in the United States, and so it had Mario and some of the launch games that came out for that system there. But I picked 1986 though because I feel like this is also where we got some other great stuff. Like we got The Legend of Zelda, we got Castlevania, I believe we got Metroid also, and then also at the same time, Sega was, now I know Sega wasn't the most popular out there, but we started getting the Sega Master System here also in the States. And so with that came like Alex Kidd, Fantasy Zone, and well, in the arcades anyways. I don't know if it came out this year for home, but we were getting games like Outrun as well too in the arcades, which for me just really started revolutionizing what arcade game graphics could be and gameplay as well too, as Sega was really pushing the technology back then. And so a lot of great franchises were starting around this time, and I mean games that would lay the foundation of great things to come in the future. Castlevania, I'm not sure if I already mentioned that. Kid Icarus, Dragon Quest as well too. Bubble Bobble, Wonder Boy. So, admittedly, not the best versions in these a lot of these respected series, but they definitely laid the groundwork right for a lot of good things to come afterwards. And so for this year, I kind of put it for I did kind of place this one here for kind of its historical relevance, at least in my eyes, the way I see it. And also because again, right, Nintendo started getting some competition, even though admittedly here in the States, it wasn't too much competition, but that we had choices basically. And again, because I did experience the Sega Master System and all, I am aware of how good some of those games were, alongside with the Nintendo as well. But yeah, for me, 1986 is definitely a great year for gaming. But then at number 8, we have 1991. And so again, I'm going off of the North American release dates on this, as some of the stuff that, if because otherwise it would change this list somewhat, right? Because some games were released in Japan, for example, sometime earlier, where when we got them in North America, it was about a year afterwards. And so again, 1991 is a good example of that, because this is when we got Super Mario World over here, where I believe it came out in 1990 in Japan. But because it came out here, that's why I'm going to lump Super Mario World into this year. And so again, because of that, it gets kind of a boost up also. But then we also got Sonic the Hedgehog. So then this is also, for example, the year that kind of started that Sega versus Nintendo rivalry, which ended up being very iconic. And because of that rivalry and competition, we just got a lot of amazing games. And so this was sort of the start of it. Because, I mean, we had like things like Street Fighter 2, which that's when it came out on the arcade, because the home version, I believe, came out the following year. But like, on the Sega Genesis, we got Streets of Rage, Golden Axe 2, and those games right there were pretty big. And then we also got the Spider-Man game too, also on the Sega Genesis. But then on the Nintendo side, like I said, we got Super Mario World, which was huge, and games like also like Super Ghouls and Ghosts, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Turtles in Time. Although that was the arcade release, I'm not quite sure if that one came out in 1991 for home. But we also got things like there was a lot of cool handheld stuff as well too, like Castlevania 2, Belmont's Revenge, and a lot of 8-bit stuff too also was still going on. Like we got a third Ninja Gaiden game. We got also a Mega Man 4, I believe is the one that came out this year, and also Battletoads as well. So a lot of great stuff, starting the 16-bit generation to get really going. And so again, kind of like the previous year, it was that I mentioned here for 1986. It was starting to lay the foundation of a lot of great stuff that would come afterwards. And so I feel like it was a pretty iconic year for that. But then at number 7, I have 2023. Now, this is the more recent one, the most recent one that I have, I should say, on my list here, and it really was a good year. Now, in terms of like quantity, one of the better years because there was a lot of great stuff that came out in this year, and especially, well, I think what's important about this year was that we've talked a lot about how game releases these days are really slow and all that, and but we just had just amazing games that came out during this year. The reason I don't have it any higher though is that while these a lot of these games are pretty amazing, none of them really. I mean, for me personally, none of them really became like very, very standout games or that really changed the industry a lot, right? Or something like that. And so that's why I don't quite place it that high. Because again, there was a lot of amazing games, but when I look back at them, none of them really like were like. I mean, there were several games on here that I really like, but none too much, and also that I think are like some of the best of all time, right? Basically, but because of the quality, or I'm sorry, the quantity of the games that came out, and also again the quality was pretty good too. Also, is why I have it pretty high. But I mean, we were getting things like there was The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom, Spider-Man 2, Baldur's Gate 3, Alan Wake 2, Street Fighter 6, Star Wars Jedi Survivor. For people that are into like these kind of games, Diablo 4, Resident Evil 4 remake, Final Fantasy 16. Yeah, I guess I'll lump in there Starfield. I haven't really played that game too much, so I can't really speak too much from it from personal experiences. So I'm just kind of going off of what I've heard about that game, right? That it's good, but a little underwhelming. But ultimately, it was still a big release that a lot of people like. Super Mario Wonder, which I think is great and probably my favorite one of this year. Hogwarts Legacy, Lies of P, Sea of Stars, the Dead Space remake, Pikmin 4, the Metroid Prime Remastered, Mortal Kombat 1, Fire Emblem Engage. Yeah, I mean, God, there was a lot of great stuff. The Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty DLC, and yeah, I mean, a lot of great stuff in this year. And so again, a lot of those games that I mentioned, I really like them. None of them that were like the best of the best in the series and all, but there was a lot of quality stuff done this year for sure. And so that's why I place it on my list here. Let's see. But then at number 6, I have 1996. Now, this year here, I almost would want to place it higher, but I don't though, just because it was a great year. It's just that a lot of these games haven't quite held up as well. But if I'm looking at the time when the year was happening, it definitely was one of a very important year. I mean, because again, this was the fifth generation was already going, and but then we got the introduction of the Nintendo 64, and so the developers were starting to get a hang of the new technology. And so we started getting some really good stuff here. And a lot of these games that would become all-time classics and trendsetters as well, too, also, because it was, I feel personally, was the first main year where 3D gaming really started to take a foothold of the industry, where it started becoming the standard. Because we already had 3D games, and some of them were good. It's just that this is where, like, pretty much across the board, the main games that were coming out were in 3D, and they played pretty well, at least for the time. And all, like I said, some of them haven't aged as well, but for the time, they were definitely good, and a lot of quality stuff. And so, starting off with, I mean, one of the greatest of all times, not for me personally, but I can definitely understand as the industry as a whole, and that was Super Mario 64. It was not the first 3D platformer, but you can almost say it was, just because of it, how well it played, how popular it was, the analog control, which made a huge difference. That set the trend for a lot of 3D games going forward with analog control, and it was pretty addicting, and it was just fun. It had that Nintendo charm to it, and you can't deny, right, and not just of how important that game was to the industry as a whole. I mean, even to this day, so many things have been influenced by that. But then also, and at least at the time, it looked like we were going to have three competitors, right? With I mean, the obvious ones, the PlayStation and the Nintendo 64, because the PlayStation was already cooking. I mean, it was doing really good already, and the Nintendo 64, when it initially came out, it was like right there, neck and neck, and I think at one point was kind of beating the PlayStation too, at least in the holiday of this year, I think. If not, they were like really neck and neck. And then the Saturn, which was behind, but it was still I feel like there was still a bit of hope for the Saturn at this time that it was going to be in third place, but it was still going to be a somewhat healthy competitor, which I still feel it was in terms of like its games, its legacy, and all that. But the sales don't really speak that though. But at the time there was, and each one of them got a really a big flagship game, and that was so Super Mario 64, obviously on the Nintendo 64, Crash Bandicoot on the PlayStation, and Nights into Dreams on the Sega Saturn. And so all of them were kind of like that mascot game, right, for each system that it almost seemed like they kind of defined the systems at that time. And in the way they did, I mean, Knights ended up becoming one of the more popular Sega Saturn games, and Crash Bandicoot. I mean, it was definitely one of the more popular platforming games on the PlayStation, and also just overall. But the PlayStation was a little bit more complex, just because the PlayStation just catered to a lot of different gamers, a lot of different genres, and all that. Where the Nintendo 64 and Saturn were a bit more niche. But either way, though, right? That was a great lineup of just with those three games on each system. But we had a lot of other cool stuff too, like Duke Nukem 3D, Mario Kart 64, Quake also, and this was also where we started getting Pokemon, Red, Blue, and Yellow, which I'm not too big on Pokemon games, but I know that was kind of a big deal. Twisted Metal 2, Parappa the Rapper, and then and then also again for Sega Saturn fans, Panzer Dragoon 2 Zwei was a big deal. Wave Race 64, and then we had a lot of cool Capcom fighters like X-Men versus Street Fighter and Street Fighter Alpha 2. I shouldn't say maybe a lot, but there was a couple of them, and those were really good. And yeah, I mean, it was definitely a cool year and all. And then also another game too, also that really helped with the 3D gaming was Tomb Raider as well. I mean, that game was along, because it came out a little bit after Super Mario 64 did. And between those two games, it was giving gamers kind of like look into the future of what 3D spaces could be like, and also where you playing them and how they look and all. And so those two very important games, right, that came out in this time frame. Resident Evil as well too. The first one. This is where it came out and started not started the survival horror genre, but definitely was the one that really popularized it. So yeah, I mean, a lot of good stuff in it for sure. And we were even getting things still out from the Super Nintendo too, with like Donkey Kong Country 3 and Super Mario RPG. So yeah, I mean, a lot of great stuff in here and all. As we were starting to see the final twilight, little bit of 16-bit, and onto the at least at the time the bigger, better 32 and 64-bit. So yeah, great here. But then at number 5, I have 2004. And 2004, I think, is kind of a popular choice for one of the more, best years in gaming. I personally really like it also just because it came out with some of my, favorite games also as well. And this is for the 6th generation when it was, one of its last years. And I always hold that the 6th generation was one of the best video game generations of all time, because this is where they were experimenting in the 5th generation with 3D graphics and all, but then they really started perfecting a lot of things more in this generation, and the graphics were pretty good looking. I mean, even to this day, excuse me, you can go back and look at these games, and they still look really well. And so we got a lot of great stuff here, a lot of sequels to some old favorite franchises, but definitely a lot of cool stuff. And this was across the 3 main games or game systems at the time, which was the PlayStation 2, the GameCube, and the Xbox. I feel like each one of them at least got one really good game, and which made all 3 systems worth owning if you're a gamer, right, that really likes playing a variety of different games and all. And also for the PC side, 2 major games also came out at this time, which were really cool first-person shooters as far as just playing them, but also the technology behind them too. Also, which both of them were starting to show what the next generation was going to bring with the 7th generation. And cool year for first-person shooters as well. I mean, just with that alone, right? We had the landmark Halo 2, which was a megaton hit for the Xbox. And not only for the Xbox, but Xbox Live and online gaming as a whole, right? Because we already had Xbox Live and online gaming, but I feel like Halo 2 really blew that up and then led into the next generation, right? With the Xbox Live, on the Xbox 360, and then eventually the PlayStation 3. because the seventh generation, where I feel like online gaming really took off. It was they were starting to set the steps for it in the sixth generation, but the seventh generation was it really blew up, and Halo 2 I feel was a big factor in that. I wasn't into the online gaming at the time. I really love Halo 2 for the single player campaign, but I know that it was a big deal for people that played online, and I want to say, I mean, I feel like it was a big trendsetter for that. But you also had Half-Life 2 and Doom 3 on the PC, which were huge. And then, I mean, we had also Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, which is just amazing. The biggest PlayStation 2 game of all time as far as sales wise goes. And then also potentially just the play field. I mean, so much to do in that game. It was pretty amazing at the time. And we had a lot of cool sequels too, also during this time, as far as for like franchises that were established in the sixth generation. So we had Ratchet and Clank Up Your Arsenal, Sly 2, Band of Thieves, Need for Speed Underground 2, Burnout 3 Takedown, Silent Hill 4 The Room, Metroid Prime 2 Echoes, Jak 3, Spider Man 2, which was based on the movie, and it was a really good superhero movie game at the time, Def Jam Fight for New York, Tony Hawk's Underground 2, Prince of Persia Warrior Within. Um, and so those are just some examples there, right, of some really amazing sequels that we were getting to, again, franchises that were starting to get established here. I think Pikmin 2 also came out too. But then we also had, Call of Duty was starting to get going too during this time frame. Fable on the Xbox also was a pretty cool action RPG. And a lot of stuff on the PC side, which I'm not too familiar with, but I think things like Counter Strike and Warhammer 40K, I think, and Sims 2, things like that. Um, but yeah, and then also on the handheld side of it, we were getting things like Metroid Zero Mission, which was an excellent remake. Um, and so yeah, I mean we were eating good during this time. The Nintendo DS had just come out also late this year too. I think it's a decent system. I like it, but at the time it was a really cool novelty as we didn't quite have the smartphones that we did now, so it was a big deal for like the casual gamer. And so one of the more popular games on it at the time, anyways, was the Super Mario 64 DS. And again, it was just cool seeing 3D graphics on a handheld. And eventually, the Nintendo DS really took off. So it was it ended it got it started during this time frame and was just adding to the things that came out in this amazing year for video games. Let's see, now we're getting to the really good stuff, at least for me personally. And so number 4, I have 1994, and I saw this countdown of on YouTube of like where they were doing like kind of what I'm doing right now, right, the best years in gaming, but they were going from more of a statistical side, right? Like I think they were basing it off of like how many really well reviewed games there were, how many bad reviewed games there were, console failures, and things like that, right? We're all taken into account. And 1994 actually came out as I think the worst year. And I don't know again how objective the list was as far as like how the accuracy of how they were doing this, but it caught me by surprise because I think back on 1994, I was like, there was a lot of great stuff that came out in this year because this was for me personally probably my favorite year of this amazing fourth generation. And I mean, so many great things that came out during this year. As the fourth generation was, starting to wrap up a bit, but this was when the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo were just firing on all cylinders. And I felt there was a lot of great stuff in this generation. Like with the Super Nintendo, I mean, we had Donkey Kong Country, Super Metroid, Final Fantasy VI, Earthbound, um, and let's see, Mega Man X2, I believe, came out of this year. Let's see, there was also, but just with those games right there that I mentioned, right? I mean, those are some of the greatest of all time. And then on the Genesis side, we had things like Sonic and Knuckles and Sonic 3, I believe, came out in the same year. Yeah, just Sonic 3 came out early, and then Sonic and Knuckles came out later in the year because they were originally going to be one game together. Earthworm Jim, which they came out on both systems, but I feel like it was a bit more popular on the Sega Genesis. We had Lion King, which was pretty popular game back then for both systems. Castlevania Bloodlines, and we were also starting to see 3D gaming kind of starting to become really popular, like stuff in the arcades. So we had like things like Tekken and Virtua Fighter 2, which were technologically really impressive, specifically Virtua Fighter 2 on the Model 2 hardware. I mean, it was quite stunning to look at. And we also got the first taste of a Capcom fighter using the CPS2 chip, arcade chip that they had, which made some really great 2D animation with with like Darkstalkers, the Night Warriors, and the King of Fighters 94. So we had a lot of great fighting games in this year as well too. Yeah, a lot of great stuff. And so again, as we're ending the fourth generation, but starting to see some pretty impressive 3D stuff as well too, which would eventually become the norm. But I mean, really, just with the Final Fantasy VI and Super Metroid right there, those two games are some of my favorite of all time. Even if it was just those two games right there and everything else was fairly mediocre, then it would still be, I would still probably consider it right for one of my favorite years in gaming just because those games are pretty amazing. But yeah, so then after that, what I have for my number three is 2007. And 2007 was really a good year because not only because of the number of games that came out, but also a lot of the franchises that it started or games that would become really popular going forward. And not only that, also I love gaming overall. So I love games from like here in the east, or I'm sorry, in the west, and also games from the east, and all. And but for many years, the video game industry was really popularized by a lot of Japanese developed games. So there was a long stretch there where it seemed like only games from Japan were like the best ones, and games from over here there would be a few here and there, right, and all, but nothing that really seemed to reach like high mainstream success outside of like the just for console specifically. But this year, I mean, we were already starting to see a lot of great games develop here in the West. But this year seemed where there was just a lot of great stuff, a lot of original IPs that were coming out from here. And so this was sort of like, so one of the reasons I liked 1986 a lot was because there was a lot of like cool new game series that started with like Zelda, Castlevania, Dragon Quest, and so forth, right? Games from Japan. This year started a lot of franchises from the West here. And so, for example, like Bioshock, Mass Effect, Assassin's Creed, Uncharted, Drake's Fortune. I mean, just with those right there, they were huge games. They became really popular in the years to come, and definitely set a certain standard, right, for Western games, specifically during the seventh generation. There were just amazing games and all, and we got a lot of great sequels out of those series too, as well. Crysis also, um, but then we also had things like Halo 3, which was huge also at the time for Xbox owners. We got Portal, that was another one too, also. But then we also got Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, which Call of Duty had already been out, but the Modern Warfare sub-series was kind of starting, which became probably one of the more popular sub-series in this franchise. Then we got Super Mario Galaxy, and on the PlayStation 2 still had a big hit with God of War 2, which was amazing. And then we also got Metroid Prime 3 Corruption on the Wii. And so, yeah, I mean, a lot of great stuff, Western developed stuff. Also, The Witcher, the first Witcher game, also. I mean, that was kind of for PC gamers, right? That was kind of a big deal, and eventually led to the amazing Witcher 3. But yeah, a lot of great stuff. Heavenly Sword, also, again, that's a bit underrated, I believe. I mean, it's a bit rough, but definitely I still feel it's a really great game. So yeah, 2007. I mean, it definitely was a franchise starter of an year. But then after that, I got for my number two is one that probably a lot of people consider as their number one, and I had a kind of a tough time between this one and the first one, but I put this one on here because I felt that there were some things that what I have in my number one did a little bit more. But this year, though, has some of the most amazing games of all time, and it definitely deserves to be on the higher end, right, of best games of all or best gaming years of all time. And this was still when we're still in the fifth generation. All systems were, well, I shouldn't say all systems, but the PlayStation was just kicking ass. The Nintendo 64 was, it had already been out there and it was starting to get a lot of good games. The Sega Saturn, unfortunately, was kind of on its way out, but it left us with some amazing stuff, though, at least in my opinion. But some of the all-time greatest games, came out during this time. And I mean, starting with the game that is considered the best game of all time in many places, and that's The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. I know I personally bought a Nintendo 64 specifically for this system, or for that game, I mean. But then we also had the amazing Metal Gear Solid, which really brought cinematic gaming, to the industry. But we also got the first Half-Life, Resident Evil 2, Banjo Kazooie, uh, a very deep, philosophical, intense JRPG with Xenogears. We got Crash Bandicoot Warped, which is considered, by many one of the best in the series. But then on that note, also as a platformer, another PlayStation platformer game series that would become popular was Spyro the Dragon. We had Medieval, which I think is a really great game also. Tomb Raider, which was still pretty popular at the time, and we got the third one in that. Suikoden 2. And on the Nintendo 64 side, we got F-Zero X, Star Wars Rogue Squadron, Body Harvest. No, wait, that wasn't on the Nintendo 64. Sorry. I don't think it was anyways. But we also got a Pokemon game, which again, for Pokemon people right now, I know that was a big deal. But yeah, I mean, just with some of those games right there, I mean, specifically with the PlayStation, I don't know. I mean, it had a lot of great stuff. I think Parasite Eve also came out in this year. Yeah, it did, yeah. So yeah, I mean, a lot of great games. But then also on the Sega Saturn, it left us with three really amazing games that came out in this year. And that was Magic Knight Rayearth, which I think is a very cute little action RPG, but really colorful and beautiful graphics and all that. And I felt like it really showed what the system could do, and unfortunately, it just came out really late. Also, Shining Force 3, which for me is one of the greatest strategy RPGs of all time, and the majestic and rare Panzer Dragoon Saga, which is a really great high budget RPG that was just unfortunately on a system that didn't sell so well and just wasn't overall very popular. But the scope of that game, though, it's pretty amazing. So yeah, I mean, great year, and definitely can see why this is amongst one of the favorite years of video gaming of all time. But what I have at my number one though is 2001. 2001, when I think about the games that came out, and then also how they were just coming out like back to back to back to back, especially during the later stretch of the year, was just incredible and crazy how this all happened. But I think it happened because I mean, gaming was really starting to become mainstream, but in a good way at the time, anyways. I feel a lot of great stuff was coming out, and part of what factors into that for me is, well, the PlayStation 2 had come out the previous year, late in 2000. So 2001 is where it really got going. So it started, getting a lot of great games for that. So we were starting to see these new cool technology, right, with the graphics and all, but then also just the different, if it wasn't new gameplay styles, at least, very modified versions of what we've already known before. But then also we got the launch of the Nintendo GameCube and the Xbox, and they had their share of great games also. And again, there was some good stuff that was coming out throughout the year, but the last stretch, so like let's say from like September-ish or so till the end of the year, just as the kids say nowadays, banger after banger after banger. Just so many great games that came out. I have to pull a list on this because again, there's just a lot of great stuff that came out. And I mean, we had Grand Theft Auto 3, which was, the megaton hit that was, and eventually the series, what it would become. Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty, which at the time when I played it was just absolutely mind blowing. Silent Hill 2, Super Smash Bros. Melee, Ico, Final Fantasy X, which was just an amazing game also. Twisted Metal Black, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3, which is probably still my favorite Tony Hawk Pro Skater game. Devil May Cry, which is an amazing action game. Gran Turismo 3. Let's see. SS Tricky, Onimusha Warlords, Max Payne, Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance, Star Wars Rogue Squadron 2, Rogue Leader, Red Faction, The Simpsons Road Rage, Sonic Adventure 2. I mean, those games were just absolutely groundbreaking in a lot of ways. And then we also had, of course, Halo that came out, the first one, and which just really revolutionized first-person shooters. And again, a lot of those games that I mentioned were coming out towards the end of the year, and so why I hold this year, and so and then we also got the Game Boy Advance that had come out, and so that started coming out, with its own lineup of games like Castlevania Circle of the Moon, Mario Kart, Super, I think it's called like Super Circuit or something like that. Um, and then, well, on the Game Boy Color, but The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Ages and Ocarina of Seasons. So those games were coming out also, and yeah, I mean, in a lot of those games, some of the major ones that came out, anyways, that I mentioned after were again coming out from between like September-ish or so to the end of the year, and just yeah, crazy how good a lot of these games were, and to have gotten them all around the same time was pretty amazing. Golden Sun, that was another one that came out on the Game Boy Advance. And yeah, just I mean, it was definitely gaming really modernizing itself, and I say that in a good way because it just really blew us away with the graphics, the new technology, the gameplay, and it was just an amazing time. And that stretch right there, I can't think of another time in video games where I was just playing so many great games that were coming out all at once. And then also the wowness factor of the new technology and the new generation that definitely played a lot into that. And again, because I mean, every generation prior to that, you had that, right? Like, oh wow, look at the new technology. But some of the generations don't quite hold up as well, right? But this one still does, and so that's why it still holds up as well, as far as where I think it's worthy to be, placed as like one of the best years of all time for video games. The only sad thing about this year, though, is that unfortunately, at the start of the year, Sega did announce that they were bowing out of the console race, since basically they just couldn't keep up, and a lot of the mistakes that Sega made and all that, they made the decision to stop making the Dreamcast and eventually become third party, which they definitely came out with some pretty cool stuff on the systems afterwards. It's just Sega was never really the same after that. But so yeah, while there was definitely the death of a console, but there was a lot of great stuff though in this year for sure. But yeah, but that's what I got here for best years in gaming. And hopefully that was a fun little trip down memory lane. And I'll see you in the next one. Later.